The moment I finished sculpting a 7-foot penguin wearing a top hat in my front yard, I knew someone would complain. But I never expected the nuclear meltdown that followed. My name is Vincent Devereux, and I have lived in Meadowbrook Estates in Boulder, Colorado for 5 years. The neighborhood sits in a perfect valley location where the Rocky Mountains provide both stunning views and brutal winter weather. This particular January had dumped nearly 3 feet of snow across our development. And instead of cursing the white nightmare like my neighbors, I decided to make art. I am a freelance graphic designer who works from home, which gives me plenty of time to indulge my creative side. Snow sculpting had become my winter hobby after attending an ice sculpture festival in Breckenridge 3 years ago. I had progressed from simple snowmen to elaborate designs that often drew kids from blocks away to take pictures. My front yard had become a winter wonderland featuring the penguin, a life-sized wolf howling at the moon, and a replica of Michelangelo's David that was anatomically correct down to every frozen detail. That Tuesday morning, while I was adding finishing touches to a dragon emerging from a snow cave, a silver Lexus SUV screeched to a halt in front of my house. The door flew open, and out stepped Patricia Henderson, the president of our homeowners association. Patricia was everything you would imagine when picturing an HOA tyrant. She was 52, wore expensive athleisure wear despite never exercising, and had that particular haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," from 3 blocks away. Her blonde highlights were so aggressive they could probably be seen from space. "Vincent Devereux," she shrieked, marching across my snow-covered lawn in boots that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "What in the name of all that is holy do you think you are doing?" I paused my work on the dragon scales and straightened up, brushing snow from my jacket. "Good morning, Patricia. I am making snow sculptures, like I do every winter." Her face had already turned an impressive shade of crimson that clashed terribly with her hot pink jacket. "This is absolutely unacceptable. You have violated at least 7 HOA regulations, and I am here to inform you that you will be facing immediate legal action if you do not remove these obscenities from your property." I glanced at my sculptures, genuinely confused. "Obscenities? Patricia, they are just snow sculptures. The kids in the neighborhood love them." "That is exactly the problem." She pointed a manicured finger at the snow David. "That statue is pornographic. You have created explicit nudity visible from the street, and this monster." She gestured wildly at my wolf. "It is frightening and creates a hostile environment for families." I could not help but laugh, which was clearly the wrong response. Patricia's eyes bulged, and I swear I could see her blood pressure rising in real time. "This is not funny, Mr. Devereux. As HOA president, I am authorized to levy fines up to $500 per day for violations of our community standards. Your little art project here constitutes multiple violations including unapproved lawn decorations, offensive displays, and creating a public nuisance." I crossed my arms, my patience wearing thin. "Patricia, I have read the HOA bylaws front to back. Nowhere does it mention snow sculptures, and before you try to claim these fall under holiday decorations, they are not decorations. They are temporary art installations made from natural precipitation on my own property." "Oh, you want to play lawyer?" Patricia pulled her phone from her designer purse. "Fine. I am documenting everything, and I am calling an emergency HOA board meeting for this evening. You will receive a formal notice of violation and a lawsuit if these are not removed by Friday. You cannot sue me for building snowmen, Patricia." "Watch me," she snapped, taking dozens of photos from every angle. The HOA bylaws clearly state that any outdoor displays must maintain community aesthetic standards and cannot create eyesores or offensive imagery. This David thing has a penis, Vincent. A frozen penis that my children have to see every time we drive by. Your children are 19 and 21, Patricia. I think they have probably seen anatomical features before. And David is a masterpiece of Renaissance art. If you have a problem with classical sculpture, take it up with Michelangelo's estate. Patricia stopped photographing and stared at me with pure venom. You think you are so clever, do you not? Living here in your little house, thumbing your nose at community standards. Well, let me tell you something, Vincent. I have destroyed people far more established than you. I will bury you in legal fees. I will make your life so miserable that you will beg to sell this house and leave Meadowbrook Estates. I will make you regret the day you ever thought you could defy me. The threat hung in the cold air between us. I had dealt with Patricia's petty tyranny before. She had sent me violation notices for leaving my trash cans visible from the street past 10 in the morning, for planting flowers she deemed the wrong color, and for parking my pickup truck in my own driveway because she thought it looked too commercial. But this felt different. This felt personal. Do what you need to do, Patricia, I said calmly. But these sculptures stay until they melt naturally. I am not breaking any rules, no matter how much you try to twist the bylaws to fit your agenda. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the scent of her fury. We will see about that. And just so you know, the board meeting tonight is just a formality. I already have the votes to fine you into oblivion. Hope your little snowmen are worth losing your house over. Patricia spun on her heel and stomped back to her Lexus, spraying slush as she peeled away from my curb. I stood there in my yard, surrounded by my frozen creations, wondering if I had just made a terrible mistake. The truth was, I knew something Patricia did not know. Something that might just level the playing field in ways she could never anticipate. 10 years ago, before Meadowbrook Estates existed, this land belonged to my grandfather, Harold Devereux. He owned 80 acres of pristine valley property and had planned to retire here. When he was diagnosed with cancer, he sold most of the land to Horizon Development Corporation for a fraction of what it was worth, just wanting to see something built on the property he loved before he died. He kept 5 acres, including the natural spring that provided water to the entire valley. When my grandfather passed, he left those 5 acres to me in his will. It included my house, the land it sat on, and most importantly, the water rights to the spring that fed every single home in Meadowbrook Estates. The development company had signed an easement agreement allowing them to tap into the spring for the neighborhood's water supply. But that easement was with my grandfather, and it had very specific terms that transferred to me as his heir. I had never thought much about it. The easement seemed straightforward, and I had no desire to interfere with my neighbor's water access. But Patricia's threat to bury me in legal fees and force me from my home had just changed my perspective entirely. If she wanted to play hardball with frivolous lawsuits, maybe it was time she learned that I held cards she did not even know existed. That evening, I received an email with the formal violation notice. It was 3 pages of dense legalese that basically said I had until Friday at 5 p.m. to remove all snow sculptures or face fines of $500 per day per violation. Since she claimed I had 7 violations, that meant potentially $3,500 per day. Patricia was not messing around. I called my lawyer, Frank Morrison, who had handled my grandfather's estate and knew all about the water rights situation. Frank was in his 60s, semi-retired, and loved nothing more than taking down bullies who abused their tiny amounts of power. Vincent. He answered cheerfully. How are those sculptures coming along? My grandson showed me pictures on Facebook. That penguin is remarkable. Thanks, Frank, but we have a problem. The HOA president is threatening to sue me over them. On what grounds? I read him the violation notice. He listened in silence, and I could hear him typing in the background. Well, that is a steaming pile of nonsense, he said finally. Snow sculptures are not permanent structures and cannot reasonably be classified as lawn decorations under standard HOA bylaws. And claiming classical artistic representations are obscene. Please, this woman is reaching so far she is going to pull a muscle. She said she has the board votes to fine me until I am forced to sell my house. Of course she does. HOA boards are usually stacked with people too scared to stand up to the tyrant in charge. But here is the thing, Vincent. She cannot force you to sell. Worst case, if she really pushes this and somehow wins, she could put a lien on your property. But that is a long legal road, and frankly, no judge is going to side with her on something this ridiculous. What if she does not care about winning? What if she just wants to bury me in legal fees like she threatened? Frank was quiet for a moment. That is the real danger with HOA disputes. Even when you are right, defending yourself costs money. People like Patricia know this and use it as a weapon. How far are you willing to take this? As far as I need to, I said. Frank, I think it might be time to review the water rights situation. I could hear the smile in his voice. I was hoping you would say that. Let me pull those files and take a fresh look. Give me until tomorrow afternoon and I will call you back with options. After hanging up with Frank, I spent the evening researching Patricia Henderson. It turned out she had quite the reputation beyond our neighborhood. She had been president of 2 previous HOAs before moving to Meadowbrook Estates. One of those associations had actually sued her for misappropriation of funds, though the case had been settled out of court. There were dozens of complaints filed with the city about her harassment of neighbors over trivial issues. The woman was a professional tyrant. The next morning, I woke to find someone had spray-painted "Remove the statues" across my driveway. The bright orange paint stood out starkly against the white snow and gray concrete. I immediately called the Boulder County Sheriff's Office to file a vandalism report. Deputy Sarah Chen arrived within an hour. She took photos, collected a sample of the paint, and took my statement. Any idea who might have done this? She asked. I have a pretty good idea, I said, explaining the situation with Patricia and the HOA. Deputy Chen shook her head. I will be honest with you, Mr. Devereux. Proving who did it will be tough unless you have cameras that caught them. I do not have cameras, never needed them before. You might want to consider installing some now. HOA disputes can get ugly. I have seen neighbors do crazy things to each other over the dumbest reasons. She closed her notepad. I will file this report, and if anything else happens, call us immediately. And seriously, get cameras. After she left, I drove to the hardware store and bought a complete security camera system. I spent the afternoon installing cameras covering every angle of my property. If Patricia or her minions tried anything else, I would have evidence. Frank called back that afternoon as promised. Vincent, I have gone through everything with a fine-tooth comb. Your water rights situation is even stronger than I remembered. Want to hear the details, please? Okay, so here is the situation. Your grandfather sold the land to Horizon Development with an easement that allows them to access the spring for residential water supply. The easement agreement was for 99 years with annual payments of $1 to your grandfather and his heirs. However, and this is the important part, The easement includes a clause that allows for termination if the property owners engage in harassment or legal action against the easement holder that the holder deems frivolous or retaliatory in nature. My heart started beating faster. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying your grandfather was a very smart man who did not trust developers. He built in protections. Now, obviously, cutting off water to an entire neighborhood is nuclear option territory and would bring its own legal complications. But the threat of it, that is leverage, real leverage. Patricia Henderson owns her home in Meadowbrook Estates. Every drop of water that flows to her house passes through your property via that easement. If you notify the HOA that you are considering terminating the easement due to their harassment and frivolous legal threats, it might just make them think twice. Would that actually hold up in court? Maybe, maybe not. It would be a complex case, but the beauty is it would never get to court. The HOA would have to explain to every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates why their water might get shut off because the president decided to wage war over snow sculptures. The political pressure alone would crush Patricia. I thought about it. It felt extreme, but then again, Patricia had threatened to bury me in legal fees and force me from my home. She had escalated this to warfare. Maybe it was time to show her that some wars cannot be won. What do I need to do? I asked. Let me draft a letter to the HOA board. We will keep it professional but make the stakes crystal clear. I will have it ready for you to review by tonight. Do it, I said. That evening, the HOA held their emergency board meeting about my sculptures. I was not invited, which seemed to violate basic fairness principles, but HOA boards often operated by their own rules. The meeting was held at Patricia's house, which also seemed like a conflict of interest, but I had stopped expecting anything approaching proper procedure from this group. Around 9 p.m., I got an email with the official decision. The board had voted unanimously to uphold all 7 violations and begin daily fines starting Saturday. The email was dripping with Patricia's smugness, ending with, "We trust you will make the right decision and comply with community standards." Frank's letter arrived in my inbox an hour later. It was beautiful, professional, calm, but devastating in its implications. It outlined my ownership of the water rights, explained the easement terms, and stated that I was formally notifying the HOA that their harassment and frivolous legal actions were causing me to reconsider the easement agreement. The letter concluded by suggesting that the board might want to consult with their own legal counsel about the potential implications of continuing their current course of action. Send it, I told Frank. Sending it certified mail to all 5 board members tomorrow morning. They should receive it by Friday. Perfect timing, I said, right when their fines are supposed to start. I spent Thursday and Friday waiting for the explosion I knew was coming. My new security cameras were working perfectly, recording everything. On Friday morning, I saw Patricia drive by my house 3 times, slowing down each time to glare at my sculptures, which I had taken the time to maintain and even enhance. The dragon now had icicle teeth, and I had added a wizard sculpture to face off against it. The certified letters were delivered Friday afternoon. I knew because I was tracking them online. Patricia signed for hers at 3:30 p.m. At 4:15, my phone started ringing. It was a number I did not recognize, but the area code was local. I let it go to voicemail, then it rang again. And again. By 5 p.m., I had 7 missed calls and 3 voicemails. The messages started with Patricia trying to sound calm and asking me to call her back regarding a mutual concern. By the 3rd message, she had dropped all pretense. "You cannot do this, Vincent. You cannot threaten an entire neighborhood's water supply over a petty dispute. This is extortion. I will have you arrested. Call me back immediately." I did not call back. Instead, I went outside and added some final touches to my sculptures, making sure to wave at the security cameras. The snow was perfect for sculpting, and I had decided to add one more piece to my collection, a beautiful snow phoenix rising from frozen flames. Saturday morning, my phone rang at 7:30. It was Frank. "Vincent, you need to see this. Check your email." I opened my laptop to find he had forwarded me a message from the HOA board. It was from Thomas Richardson, the board vice president. The email was apologetic in tone and requested an emergency meeting with me to discuss a path forward that serves everyone's interests. It made no mention of the fines and actually complimented my obvious artistic talent. "They are scared," Frank said, stating the obvious. Thomas probably looked up the water rights situation and realized Patricia had led them into a minefield. He is trying to broker peace before this gets worse. "What do you think I should do?" "Meet with them. But not at Patricia's house. Neutral ground, and I will be there with you." We arranged a meeting for Monday morning at a coffee shop in downtown Boulder, far from Meadowbrook Estates. I agreed to meet with Thomas and one other board member. I specifically stated Patricia should not attend, knowing that would infuriate her but not caring. Sunday was quiet. Too quiet. I kept checking my cameras, expecting something to happen, but nothing did. The neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. Monday morning, Frank and I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. Thomas Richardson showed up right on time along with Jennifer Ashford, the board secretary. They both looked nervous. Thomas was in his 40s, an accountant who clearly hated confrontation. Jennifer was younger, maybe 35, and had always seemed reasonable in previous HOA communications. They ordered coffee, and we sat at a corner table away from other customers. "Thank you for meeting with us," Thomas began. "I want to start by saying that the board has voted to suspend all fines pending further review of the situation." "Smart move," Frank said simply. "We were not aware of the water rights situation," Jennifer added. "Patricia never mentioned it when she was pushing for action against your sculptures." "Perhaps because she did not know," I said, though I suspected Patricia probably did know and had hoped to bully me before I ever thought to use that leverage. Thomas cleared his throat. "Mr. Devereux, we are in a difficult position. Patricia is the president elected by the homeowners, but she has a tendency to be aggressive in enforcing rules. Many of us on the board are concerned that she may have overstepped here." "May have." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Thomas, let us be clear about what happened. Your president threatened to financially destroy my client over temporary snow sculptures that violate no actual laws and only arguably violate vague HOA aesthetics provisions. She told him she would bury him in legal fees and force him from his home. That is not aggressive enforcement, that is targeted harassment." Jennifer looked uncomfortable. "We did not know she said those things." "Well, she did. I have witnesses to the conversation." I had actually asked my neighbor, Mike Santos, if he had heard Patricia yelling in my driveway that first day. He had and was willing to provide a statement. Thomas sighed. "What would it take to resolve this without involving the water rights?" "We understand you have leverage, but surely we can find a reasonable compromise." "Here is what I want," I said. "First, all violation notices against me are formally withdrawn and expunged from HOA records. Second, the HOA bylaws are amended to specifically allow temporary snow sculptures and other forms of seasonal artistic expression that do not damage property or create genuine safety hazards. Third, Patricia issues a formal written apology for her harassment and threats. And fourth, The board implements oversight procedures to prevent any single board member from unilaterally targeting homeowners with frivolous complaints. That is a lot, Thomas said weakly. Your entire neighborhood's water supply is a lot, Frank countered. This seems reasonable by comparison. Jennifer leaned forward. The first two we can probably do. The bylaws amendment would require a vote, but I think we could get it through. The fourth item makes sense too, but Patricia will never apologize. You do not know how she is. She would rather burn everything down than admit she was wrong. Then you have a problem, I said, because I am not backing down. Patricia declared war. I am just showing her that she picked the wrong battlefield. Thomas pulled out his phone and stepped away to make a call. We could not hear what he was saying, but his body language suggested it was not going well. He came back looking defeated. I just spoke with our HOA attorney. He confirmed that your water rights position is legitimate and that pursuing legal action against you while you hold that leverage would be incredibly foolish. He also said that Patricia's threats could potentially expose the HOA to liability for harassment. So where does that leave us? Frank asked. I need to call an emergency board meeting. Can we have until Wednesday to get back to you with a formal response? I looked at Frank, who nodded slightly. Wednesday at noon. That is the deadline. And Thomas, you might want to seriously reconsider Patricia's leadership. This will not be the last time she goes rogue and creates problems for everyone. They left, both looking like they were heading to a funeral. Frank and I stayed to finish our coffee. What do you think will happen? I asked. Best case. They force Patricia to back down or remove her as president. Worst case. She refuses to budge and you have to actually decide if you are willing to follow through on the water threat. I would not really cut off the water. That would hurt innocent people. I know that, and deep down, they probably know that too. But the threat is real enough to create chaos for Patricia. Sometimes that is enough. I went home and waited. Tuesday passed slowly. I spent the time working on a design project for a client, but my mind kept wandering to the HOA situation. Around 4 p.m., I saw Patricia's Lexus cruise by my house again. She was alone this time, and even from a distance, I could see the rage on her face. 10 minutes later, I saw her car return, but this time she stopped. She got out and marched up to my front door. I watched on my security camera feed as she rang the doorbell repeatedly. When I did not answer, she started pounding on the door. Vincent, Vincent, I know you are in there. Open this door right now. I stayed quiet, recording everything. You think you are so smart, do you not? Hiding behind your water rights like a coward. Those sculptures are obscene, and you know it. You are doing this just to spite me, and I will not stand for it. She kept yelling for another 5 minutes before finally leaving. The entire rant was captured in high definition from 3 different angles. I sent the footage to Frank immediately. This helps, he said when he called back. She is unhinged, and now we have proof. If this goes to court, her behavior matters. No judge is going to side with someone who shows up at your house screaming threats. Wednesday morning arrived. At 11:45, I got an email from Thomas Richardson requesting to move our meeting to 4 p.m. Still finalizing some details, the message said. I agreed. Though the delay made me nervous, Frank and I met at the same coffee shop at 3:45. Thomas and Jennifer arrived at 4, but this time they had their attorney with them, a man named David Kruger from a firm in Denver that specialized in HOA law. Thank you for your flexibility with the timing, David said as we all sat down. This situation has been complicated, as I am sure you can imagine. What is the board's decision? Frank asked, cutting through the pleasantries. David pulled out a folder. The board has agreed to your terms with one modification. All violation notices will be withdrawn and expunged. The bylaws will be amended to allow temporary snow sculptures and similar seasonal displays. New oversight procedures will be implemented to prevent unilateral enforcement actions. However, regarding Patricia Henderson, the board does not have the authority to force her to issue a personal apology. What they can do is issue a formal board statement acknowledging that the enforcement action was not handled appropriately and extending regrets for any distress caused. "That is not what we asked for," I said. "I understand," David replied, "but here is the reality. Patricia is an elected officer. The board can limit her authority, but they cannot force her to make personal statements. However, they can call for a special election to potentially remove her as president, which is what they have decided to do." Frank and I exchanged glances. "When?" Frank asked. "The special election will be held in 30 days. All homeowners will be notified and given the opportunity to vote. The board will be recommending that Patricia be removed from her position." "Will she fight it?" I asked. Thomas spoke up. "Oh, she is fighting it. She has already sent an email to the entire neighborhood claiming we are staging a coup and that you have blackmailed the board with threats to cut off water. She is telling everyone that you are the real villain here. Which is why we need something from you," David said. "We need your agreement in writing that you will not interfere with the water supply regardless of the election outcome. The homeowners need assurance that their water is not actually at risk." "Of course," I said. "I never wanted to cut off anyone's water. I just wanted Patricia to back down." "We understand that," David said, "but perception matters. Patricia is spinning this as you being a dangerous radical who is holding the neighborhood hostage. We need to counteract that narrative." Frank pulled out his laptop. "We can draft an agreement right now. Vincent commits to maintaining the easement regardless of any HOA disputes, and the HOA commits to the terms we discussed. Everyone signs. Everyone goes home happy." It took an hour to draft the agreement, with David and Frank negotiating the precise language. Finally, we had something everyone could accept. The document stated that I would not terminate or interfere with the water easement under any circumstances related to HOA disputes, and in exchange, the HOA formally withdrew all violations, agreed to the bylaws amendments, and committed to the oversight procedures. Everyone signed, and copies were distributed. "What about Patricia's email?" I asked. "She is telling the neighborhood I am blackmailing them," David grimaced. "That is defamation, frankly. She has exposed herself to potential legal liability with that. If you want to pursue it, you would probably win." "I do not want to sue her," I said. "I just want her to leave me alone." "Then send your own email to the neighborhood," Jennifer suggested. "Explain your side. Share the video of her screaming at your door. Let people see who the real aggressor is." It was not a bad idea. That evening, I composed an email to the Meadowbrook Estates community email list. I explained the situation calmly and factually, attaching the security footage of Patricia's tirade at my door. I also attached photos of my snow sculptures and explained that they were temporary art projects that brought joy to many kids in the neighborhood. I concluded by stating that I had never threatened anyone's water supply and had signed an agreement guaranteeing the easement would remain in place. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, I had dozens of replies from neighbors expressing support. Many said they loved my sculptures and thought Patricia had gone too far. Several shared their own stories of being harassed by her over minor issues. A few neighbors even came by my house to see the sculptures in person and thanked me for standing up to the HOA. Patricia sent a furious response to the email list, calling me a liar and claiming the video was edited. This prompted even more neighbors to side with me, with several pointing out that unedited security footage from multiple angles was pretty hard to fake. The next 30 days were chaos. Patricia campaigned aggressively to keep her position, sending daily emails warning that removing her would lead to neighborhood decline and property value loss. She claimed I was part of a conspiracy to take over the HOA and eliminate all standards. She even made flyers with photos of my Snow David, zooming in on the anatomical details and claiming I was exposing children to pornography. The flyers backfired spectacularly. Several parents in the neighborhood publicly called her out for sexualizing classical art and noted that their children had seen David in art history books without trauma. One neighbor, a middle school art teacher named Linda Garcia, wrote a passionate defense of my sculptures and pointed out that Patricia's obsession with frozen anatomy said more about her than it did about my artwork. I kept my head down and let the neighborhood drama play out. My sculptures slowly began to melt as February brought warmer temperatures, but I maintained them as best I could. The dragon was the first to lose its structural integrity, collapsing into a heap of wet snow one sunny afternoon. The kids who had loved it left flowers on the pile, which was both sweet and hilarious. Patricia tried one more tactic about 2 weeks before the election. She filed a complaint with Boulder County Code Enforcement claiming my sculptures violated local ordinances. A code enforcement officer named Marcus Webb came out to investigate. He walked around my yard, examined the sculptures, took some measurements, and then shook his head. "Mr. Devereux, I have to be honest. This is the weirdest complaint I have gotten in 15 years of doing this job. There is absolutely nothing in the county code about snow sculptures. They are temporary, they are on your property. They are not creating any hazards. Whoever filed this complaint is wasting everyone's time." "It was Patricia Henderson, the HOA president," I said. Marcus actually laughed. "Yeah, that checks out. I have gotten probably 10 complaints from her over the years about various neighbors. She once tried to get us to cite someone for having grass that was the wrong shade of green. I am going to close this as unfounded, and I am going to note in the file that it appears to be harassment. Can you do anything about the harassment? Not really my department, but between you and me. Document everything. If she keeps it up, you might have grounds for a restraining order." 3 days before the election, something happened that changed everything. I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of my security system alarm. I pulled up the camera feeds on my phone and saw someone in a dark hoodie in my front yard with what looked like a sledgehammer, destroying my remaining snow sculptures. I called 911 immediately and then watched in horror as the figure systematically demolished the penguin, the wolf, and David. They worked quickly, clearly knowing they did not have much time. Within 5 minutes, my carefully crafted sculptures were heaps of broken snow. The Boulder County Sheriff's deputies arrived within 10 minutes, but the vandal was already gone. Deputy Chen, who had taken the original vandalism report, was one of the responding officers. She reviewed my security footage, and we all watched as the hooded figure destroyed my work. "Can you identify who it is?" I asked. Deputy Chen zoomed in on several frames. "Hard to say definitively. The hoodie obscures most identifying features, but look at this." She pointed at a frame where the person's sleeve had ridden up. "That looks like a woman's watch. Expensive one, too." "See how it catches the light?" We watched more footage, and in one frame where the person raised the sledgehammer, the hoodie pulled back slightly. For just a moment, we could see blonde highlights. "That looks like Patricia Henderson," I said. "Looks like, but not enough for a positive ID," Deputy Chen said. "However, we have enough for a search warrant. If we can find that hoodie and sledgehammer at her house and they match what we see here, that would be sufficient evidence. Do it, I said. Deputy Chen got a judge to approve a search warrant by noon the next day. I was not present for the search, but Deputy Chen called me that afternoon with the results. We found everything, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. The hoodie, the sledgehammer, even the boots she was wearing. They were all in her garage and she had not even cleaned the snow off them. She clearly thought she would get away with it. What happens now? We are arresting her for criminal mischief and trespassing. It is a misdemeanor, but given the clear premeditation and the fact that she was caught on camera, the DA is taking it seriously. She will probably get probation and community service, but more importantly, she will have a criminal record. Patricia was arrested that evening. The news spread through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire. Her mugshot, with her hair disheveled and mascara running, was shared widely on neighborhood social media. She posted bail the next morning, but the damage to her reputation was catastrophic. The special election happened 2 days later. Patricia lost by a landslide, receiving only 11 votes out of 234 cast. Thomas Richardson was elected as the new president, with Jennifer Ashford as vice president. One of their first acts was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the HOA and to present me with a plaque thanking me for my contributions to neighborhood character and community spirit. Patricia's criminal case proceeded through the system over the next several months. She initially pleaded not guilty and tried to claim the security footage was fabricated, but her own lawyer convinced her that was a losing strategy. Eventually, she pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for the time I spent creating the sculptures, which the judge calculated at $1,500 based on my professional design rates. The restitution check arrived in May, just as the last patches of snow were finally melting from the shadiest corners of my yard. Patricia had also moved out of Meadowbrook Estates, selling her house and relocating somewhere in Aurora. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had tried to become president of her new HOA, but was rejected when the background check revealed her criminal record. The HOA bylaws were officially amended in March to allow temporary snow sculptures and other seasonal artistic displays, with reasonable provisions about size and placement to ensure they did not actually create hazards or block visibility. The amendment passed with 92% approval from homeowners. That next winter, when the first major snowfall hit Boulder, I went outside with renewed enthusiasm. I had already been planning my sculptures for months, sketching designs and working out the engineering challenges. This time, I decided to involve the neighborhood kids, hosting weekend sculpting sessions where anyone could come learn the basics. On the first Saturday of December, 15 kids showed up with their parents. We built a whole menagerie of creatures in my front yard, from simple snowmen to ambitious attempts at dinosaurs and castles. The kids were natural artists, unafraid to experiment and make mistakes. Their enthusiasm reminded me why I had started doing this in the first place, not to annoy anyone or make statements, but simply because creating beauty from something as temporary and democratic as snow brought joy. Thomas and Jennifer stopped by that afternoon with hot chocolate for everyone. "This is what community should look like," Thomas said, watching kids laugh as they rolled giant snowballs across the yard. "I am sorry it took Patricia's meltdown for us to figure that out. Water under the bridge," I said. "Or in this case, water through the easement," he laughed. "Speaking of which, we are working on formally recognizing your family's contribution to the neighborhood. Your grandfather's spring is the reason this community exists. We want to create a small memorial or plaque acknowledging that." "I think he would have liked that," I said. "He loved this land and wanted it to bring people together, not drive them apart." As winter settled over Meadowbrook Estates, my front yard became the unofficial gathering place for neighborhood families. The sculptures changed every few weeks as earlier ones melted or collapsed, making room for new creations. I taught techniques to anyone who wanted to learn, and soon other yards in the neighborhood started featuring their own snow art. In February, we held the first annual Meadowbrook Estates Snow Sculpture Contest, with categories for kids and adults. The prize was a trophy I designed myself, featuring a penguin in a top hat as a callback to where this whole saga began. 32 entries were submitted, transforming the neighborhood into a winter art gallery. The contest became a local news story when a reporter from the Boulder Daily Camera heard about it. The article featured photos of sculptures from around the neighborhood and included the backstory about my conflict with Patricia. The headline read, "From HOA Nightmare to Winter Wonderland, Boulder Neighborhood Embraces Snow Art." The story went viral, getting picked up by national news outlets and even some international media. I received emails from people around the world who had their own HOA horror stories, thanking me for standing up to petty tyranny. Several asked for advice on dealing with their own HOA problems. I tried to respond thoughtfully, always emphasizing that conflict should be a last resort, but that sometimes bullies need to be shown that their targets are not as powerless as they assume. The water rights angle fascinated a lot of people. I did several interviews with local media about water law in Colorado, explaining how my grandfather's foresight in protecting his rights had inadvertently given me leverage in a completely unrelated dispute. A law professor at the University of Colorado Boulder contacted me about using the case as a teaching example in his property law class. I agreed, finding it amusing that Patricia's attempted reign of terror had turned into an educational case study. By March, as the snow melted and revealed the muddy yards underneath, I reflected on everything that had happened. What had started as a simple creative hobby had turned into a neighborhood battle, a criminal case, and ultimately a community transformation. Patricia had wanted to make an example of me, to show everyone that she had the power to destroy anyone who defied her. Instead, she had shown everyone the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of standing up for principle. The irony was that I had never set out to fight the HOA or challenge Patricia's authority. I had just wanted to build some sculptures in my own yard and bring a little beauty to the cold, dark winter. But Patricia's aggressive overreach had forced me into a corner, and the water rights issue had given me the leverage to fight back effectively. I thought about what might have happened if I had not inherited those water rights. Would I have caved to Patricia's demands and removed my sculptures? Would I have let her bury me in legal fees as she threatened? Probably not, because I am too stubborn for my own good sometimes. But the fight would have been much harder and more expensive without that ace up my sleeve. The water rights taught me something important about power dynamics and conflict resolution. Patricia had assumed she held all the power because she controlled the HOA. She was used to people backing down because fighting seemed pointless and expensive. She never considered that her target might have leverage of his own, and by the time she realized I did, it was too late to back down without losing face. Her decision to escalate to vandalism was the final nail in her coffin. If she had just accepted the board's decision to back down and had let the special election play out, she might have survived politically. Some homeowners might have still supported her rigid enforcement approach. but by sneaking into my yard in the middle of the night to destroy my sculptures with a sledgehammer, she had crossed from petty tyrant into criminal territory. No amount of spin could salvage that. As spring arrived and I began planning my garden for the summer, I kept thinking about community and what it meant. Meadowbrook Estates was a better place now than it had been a year ago, not because the houses were nicer or the rules were stricter, but because people felt free to express themselves and connect with their neighbors without fear of arbitrary enforcement. The new HOA board under Thomas's leadership focused on actual issues like maintaining common areas, organizing social events, and handling legitimate safety concerns. They stopped treating homeowners as subjects to be controlled and started treating them as stakeholders in a shared community. It was a radical shift from Patricia's approach, and the difference was remarkable. In June, the board officially dedicated a memorial to my grandfather near the spring that supplied the neighborhood's water. It was a simple stone marker with a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Harold Devereux, whose vision and generosity made this community possible. The water that sustains us flows from his land and his legacy." They invited me to the dedication ceremony, which was attended by over 100 neighbors. I stood by the memorial that warm summer evening, surrounded by people who had become genuine friends through all the chaos, and I felt my grandfather's presence. He would have enjoyed this, I thought. He would have liked seeing his land used this way, bringing people together around something as essential as water. Thomas gave a short speech about community values and the importance of respecting the history that made our neighborhood possible. He mentioned my fight with Patricia only briefly, noting that sometimes conflicts arise that test what a community truly values. Vincent reminded us that we are not just homeowners bound by bylaws, he said. We are neighbors, and neighbors support each other's joy rather than policing each other's differences. After the ceremony, several people approached me to share their own stories of dealing with Patricia over the years. I heard about fines for basketball hoops in driveways, threats over vegetable gardens, complaints about children playing too loudly, and dozens of other petty grievances that Patricia had turned into major conflicts. The stories painted a picture of someone who was deeply unhappy and had found purpose in controlling others. One woman, elderly Mrs. Yamamoto, who lived 3 doors down from me, shared something that stuck with me. "Patricia came after me because I hung prayer flags on my porch," she said. "She said they were not appropriate for the neighborhood aesthetic. I am Buddhist. Those flags are part of my spiritual practice. She wanted to fine me $500 for expressing my faith in my own home." "What did you do?" I asked. "I took them down," she said quietly. "I could not afford to fight her. I did not have water rights." She smiled at me. "But after what you did, I put them back up. And when she sent me another violation notice, I sent it back with a note saying no. That was all. Just no." She never responded, and the flags are still there. These conversations made me realize that my fight with Patricia had been about more than snow sculptures. It had been about whether one person could impose their will on an entire community through fear and intimidation. By standing up to her, I had given others permission to do the same. The water rights were leverage, sure, but the real power came from people deciding they had had enough. That summer, I focused on my garden, creating a colorful landscape of native Colorado plants that attracted bees and butterflies. A few neighbors asked if I was worried about the HOA complaining, and I just laughed. The new board had specifically approved native plant landscaping as part of their environmental initiatives. The culture had changed completely. In August, I received a strange letter forwarded through Frank Morrison. It was from Patricia. The envelope had an Aurora postmark, and inside was a single page handwritten. "Mr. Devereux," it began formally. "I am writing this letter at the suggestion of my therapist as part of taking accountability for my actions. I want you to know that I understand I was wrong in how I treated you and many other residents of Meadowbrook Estates. My need to control everything around me came from my own insecurity and unhappiness. When you refused to back down, it triggered something in me, and I reacted inappropriately and eventually illegally. I have been diagnosed with anxiety and control issues that I am now addressing in treatment. This does not excuse what I did, but it helps me understand it. I do not expect your forgiveness, and I am not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that your sculptures were actually quite beautiful, and the neighborhood is better for having someone who creates rather than destroys. I am sorry. Patricia Henderson." I read the letter 3 times, surprised by the vulnerability in it. This was a very different person from the screaming tyrant who had appeared in my driveway that January morning. I did not know if the apology was genuine or just another manipulation, but I decided to take it at face value. Holding on to anger would not serve me. I wrote back briefly, thanking her for the letter and wishing her well in her recovery. I meant it. I did not want Patricia to suffer endlessly for her mistakes. I just wanted her to stop hurting other people. If therapy was helping her get there, that was good enough for me. Fall arrived, bringing the golden aspens that made Colorado autumns so spectacular. I spent September hiking in the mountains and working on a series of landscape paintings inspired by the changing seasons. As October turned to November, I started planning my snow sculptures for the coming winter. This time, I decided to do something ambitious. I wanted to create a full scene, a winter village populated by snow characters engaged in various activities. I sketched designs for shopkeepers, children playing, dogs, cats, even a snow band with instruments. The project would take weeks and would transform my entire front yard into a frozen tableau. When the first major snow fell in early December, I began work immediately. The neighborhood kids joined me every weekend, and together we built the village piece by piece. We created a snow bakery with a baker holding a tray of snowball cookies. We built a snow schoolhouse with a teacher and students. We constructed a snow park with kids on swings made from icicles. The project attracted attention from beyond our neighborhood. Families drove from across Boulder to see the snow village, and it became something of a local landmark. I set up a donation box for anyone who wanted to contribute to the local children's hospital, and by Christmas, we had raised over $5,000. On Christmas Eve, the neighborhood gathered in my front yard for caroling among the snow sculptures. Someone had strung lights through the village, and the frozen characters seemed to glow from within. As I stood there singing Silent Night with my neighbors, their voices rising into the cold, clear air, I thought about how different things could have been. If Patricia had just left me alone, I would have built my sculptures in peace, and that would have been the end of it. But she had chosen conflict, and in doing so, she had unwittingly created something much larger. She had unified a neighborhood that had been cowed into submission. She had sparked a conversation about community values and the proper role of HOAs. She had even, through her downfall, possibly gotten the help she needed for her control issues. As the snow fell softly on Christmas Eve, adding fresh layers to our frozen village, I realized that the whole experience had taught me something essential about power and community. Real power does not come from controlling others or wielding authority arbitrarily. It comes from bringing people together around shared joy and common purpose. Patricia had power over people through fear, but I had discovered power with people through creativity, and shared experience. The water rights had been useful leverage in a specific conflict, but they were not the real story. The real story was about a community learning to stand up for what mattered. It was about neighbors supporting each other's right to find joy and express creativity. It was about choosing connection over control. The new year arrived with more snow and more sculptures. The village continued to grow and evolve through January and February. We added new characters and scenes, and every weekend brought fresh volunteers eager to contribute. The snow sculpture contest returned, bigger than the previous year, with over 50 entries and judges from the Boulder Arts Commission. In March, as the snow began its inevitable melt, we documented everything with photographs and videos. The village would not last, but the memories and the community bonds it had created would endure. As the last snow character collapsed into formless white mush, I felt not sadness but satisfaction. We had created something beautiful and temporary, which was the whole point. The joy was in the creation and the sharing, not in the permanence. Spring brought new projects and new opportunities for community building. The HOA organized a neighborhood cleanup day, a community garden project, and a summer concert series in the common area. These were things Patricia's regime would never have considered, too focused as it was on enforcement rather than enrichment. I continued my design work and my art projects, but I also found myself more involved in neighborhood activities. I joined the HOA board as an at-large member, figuring I should help build the positive community we had fought for, rather than just criticizing from the sidelines. It was strange going from HOA adversary to HOA member, but it felt right. One evening in late April, sitting on my porch and watching the sunset paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of pink and gold, I reflected on everything that had happened since that January morning when Patricia first appeared in my driveway. The conflict had been stressful and sometimes scary, but it had also been transformative. I had learned that standing up to bullies was not just about winning specific fights. It was about refusing to accept that might makes right, that authority figures deserve deference regardless of how they behave, that community means conformity rather than diversity. By refusing to back down over something as simple as snow sculptures, I had helped shift the entire culture of Meadowbrook Estates. The water rights had been my leverage, but the real power had come from being right and being willing to fight for that rightness. Patricia had counted on me being too intimidated or too exhausted to resist. She had been wrong, and that miscalculation had cost her everything she thought she had built. As summer arrived and I planted my garden, I thought about my grandfather and the legacy he had left me. He had given me land and water rights, yes, but more importantly, he had given me an example of how to be a good neighbor and steward of resources. He had sold his beloved land to developers, not because he needed the money, but because he wanted to see it used and enjoyed by families. He had protected the water rights not out of greed, but to ensure the spring would be respected and maintained. I tried to honor that legacy by using what he had given me to protect community rather than to exploit it. The water continued to flow through the easement to every home in Meadowbrook Estates, as it always had and always would. The spring remained healthy and clean, protected by the buffer zone around it that my grandfather had established decades ago. In July, Thomas approached me with an interesting proposition. "The county is looking at water resource management," he said. "They are trying to identify significant private water sources and create protection frameworks. Your spring is on their list. They want to potentially create a conservation easement that would protect it permanently while compensating you for development rights." "Tell me more," I said. Over the next several months, I worked with county officials and environmental groups to establish a conservation easement on the spring property. The agreement guaranteed that the land around the spring would never be developed and that the water quality would be permanently protected. In exchange, I received a combination of tax benefits and a modest annual payment for maintaining the buffer zone. The agreement also formalized the water access for Meadowbrook Estates, removing any future ambiguity about the easement terms. It meant that no matter who inherited the property after me, the neighborhood's water supply would be protected, and so would the spring itself. When the agreement was finalized in October, the HOA hosted a celebration at the Spring Memorial. Environmental leaders spoke about the importance of protecting natural water sources in Colorado's increasingly arid climate. County officials praised the arrangement as a model for balancing private property rights with community resource needs. I said a few words, talking about my grandfather's vision and the importance of water as a shared resource that transcends property boundaries. "Water connects us all," I said. "It flows through our land without regard for who owns what. This spring has served this valley for thousands of years, and with this protection, it will serve it for thousands more. That is a legacy worth preserving." As I stood there beside the memorial to my grandfather, looking out at the faces of my neighbors, I felt a deep sense of completion. The conflict with Patricia had been painful and strange, but it had led to something genuinely positive. It had forced conversations about community values, property rights, environmental protection, and the proper balance between individual freedom and collective standards. That winter, when the snow returned and I began my third season of sculpture projects, there was no drama, no threats, no conflict. Just neighbors working together to create beauty from frozen water. Just kids learning to see snow not as an obstacle but as a canvas. Just a community that had learned to celebrate differences rather than police them. I built a new penguin in a top hat, a tribute to where everything had started. This time, though, he was surrounded by friends, a whole colony of penguins in various poses and outfits. Kids added their own penguins throughout the winter, until my front yard hosted probably 50 of the frozen birds. On Valentine's Day, someone left a card in my mailbox. It was unsigned but clearly from someone in the neighborhood. Inside was a simple message. "Thank you for teaching us that water is stronger than rules, that creativity matters more than control, and that neighbors should build each other up rather than tear each other down. You fought for all of us, even when we were too scared to fight for ourselves." I kept that card on my refrigerator, a reminder of why standing up to Patricia had mattered. It had not been about snow sculptures or water rights, or even about putting a tyrant in her place. It had been about defending the principle that communities thrive when people are free to express themselves, create beauty, and find joy in their own homes. As March arrived and the snow began its annual retreat, I watched my penguin colony slowly melt back into water that would seep into the ground, eventually making its way to the spring that sustained our neighborhood. Everything was connected, just like my grandfather had always said. The snow became water, became community, became memory, became story, became legacy. Patricia Henderson was gone, moved on to whatever her next chapter held. I genuinely hoped she had found peace and was getting the help she needed. But her attempted reign of terror had inadvertently created something she never could have imagined. A neighborhood transformed from fearful compliance into confident collaboration. The HOA continued its evolution under Thomas's leadership, finding the right balance between maintaining standards and respecting individual expression. The bylaws became more flexible while still protecting property values and neighborhood safety. The board became more transparent and accountable, with regular community meetings where homeowners could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. As spring turned to summer, and I planned my next projects, I realized I had found something precious in Meadowbrook Estates. Not just a house or a neighborhood, but a genuine community built on mutual respect and shared creativity. The water from my grandfather's spring flowed beneath it all, literally and metaphorically, connecting us in ways both practical and profound. Looking back, I could not say I was glad Patricia had attacked my snow sculptures that cold January morning. The conflict had been stressful and had taken a toll on everyone involved. But I was glad I had stood up to her, glad I had the water rights leverage to level the playing field, and glad that the whole experience had sparked positive change. The snow sculptures would return every winter, different designs and new visions, but always rooted in the same principle that beauty and creativity deserved protection and celebration. The spring would continue flowing, sustaining the neighborhood through my lifetime and far beyond. And the community would keep growing and evolving, hopefully never forgetting the lessons learned from our HOA nightmare. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the last light fade from the mountains and thinking about everything that had happened, I felt at peace. The fight was over, the community was healed, and the water flowed on, constant and life-giving beneath it all. And somewhere in Aurora, I hoped Patricia Henderson was finding her own peace, learning that true happiness comes not from controlling others, but from letting go and allowing life to flow around you, like water, like snow, like the seasons themselves, endless and forgiving and always moving forward.